Hello everyone and welcome to another video on my Let's Play series on The Crew 2. In this video I would like to talk about major problems that I found with The Crew 2. Now keep in mind I won't talk about issues like the headlight range, the physics, and other problem. Developers recently acknowledged that they're looking into all of the stuff like that on their latest live stream, and so yeah, there's not really a point in me covering this. This video will primarily talk about the overall gameplay problems of The Crew 2, and real quick I would like to say I was on the fence about making this video for a few days now, since I wasn't sure if this video would really be worth my time, or really worth the effort for me to actually even make, because the community is, in my opinion, way too defensive about the game, especially since there's massive problems that they're just defending and saying like stuff like the loot drop rates are perfectly fine and that like it's more complicated to make it work, but at the end of the day that's not necessarily true. It would actually benefit a lot of players if they changed the loot drop rate system. But recently in the stream as well they said they'll look into that, but I mean I get it, the game needs to have like a farming aspect with the loot drop rate, but basically this kind of drop rate is just ridiculous. It's very frustrating, it's annoying and so forth, but slight mini rant about that outside. That's not what this video is primarily about. It's not about the loot drop rates and so forth. I will touch on that, but I just wanted to mention that that's kind of basically this video is mainly going to be about my opinion, so take this video with a grain of salt. So let's get right into the first gameplay problem, which is the crew aspect of the game. So as you probably know, the first and second games allow you to play missions and co-op with your friends or random players, which is called the crew system. And the biggest problem that I see with it is that the second game doesn't actually give you an incentive to play missions in a crew of 2 or more players. With the first game you actually got benefits with playing missions in a crew of 2 or more players, but in this game you don't really. There's a lot of achievements that are required, and of course in the first game there was also a lot of achievements that required you to do things in the crew as well. But the second game doesn't really have you do that. There's only a few achievements that require you to do that, and that's pretty much it. In the first game you also had an option to activate a perk to give you a 20% increase in bucks and XP when playing in a crew. But in this game there is nothing like that. So players will just not have a reason at all to play missions with their friends, unless they get stuck on a particular mission because they're not very good at the game, or their vehicle level is just not quite high enough for that mission. So personally I feel they should change the crew system so that it will give you a 20% increase in earned bucks and fans, and a 20% loot drop increase for playing in a crew would be nice. But they should also make it so that the 20% bonuses will only work if most of the players in your crew will complete the mission within the time they get after someone crosses the finish line, which you get that 30-second extra time to finish a mission. So yeah, I mean, you'd probably say like the whole entire 20% increase would be unfair. I disagree with that, because the crew, after all, the game's called The Crew 2, so the main priority of the game, or well, not the main, like a large part of the game should be about playing with your friends in a crew. And by having the ability to basically have benefits with playing with a crew, it'll actually give people a reason to do more missions with their crewmates. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents about that. You don't have to agree with that, but that's just, yeah. And let's move on to the second problem now. With the second problem, I found the basically the farming aspect of the game. Now, I know this will make most players extremely salty with me mentioning this, but hear me out on this. Pretty much the farming aspect isn't really that bad, but there's one massive problem with farming in the Crew 2 right now. It's extremely boring. All you're really doing is playing the same mission over and over and over again by yourself, and that's just not fun at all. As far as I've heard, most players say that if you farm for around 6 hours on the same mission over and over again, you will pretty much get all the purple parts and so forth, but again, that is extremely boring. But the boring factor of the farming would go away if the game actually had a real PvP system in place, since it would actually give you a reason to use all of your driving skills to finish the race in the highest position you can to get the better rewards. Because right now, with farming with missions, you're putting very minimum amount of effort into the missions, so that's why it feels kind of boring for me especially. I want to use all of my skills, and I want like to feel on edge, like if I don't win this race then I will just like not get it. But the missions are really easy to do in terms of just farming over and over again. Of course, if you know the fastest route already by doing like corner cuts and so forth, then you're fine, and that's where it starts getting boring after a while. And of course, you'd also have to avoid traffic while you're doing the missions as well, but again, that's not terribly hard. In fact, I do actually see that the whole entire farming aspect is making the game slowly go down a slippery slope in terms of losing most of its player base. And the reason why I see that is because when the game actually launched, there were around 6,600 players who played on the first game. On Steam, that is. I'm basing this on Steam. And since the launch date, the daily player count has slowly been going downhill to the point that around half the players have already stopped playing the game. Around a week later, the week after the game's official launch. In fact, on July 9th, there were only around 3,200 players, so half of the players have already stopped playing the game. So, yeah, that is a pretty big problem in my opinion if players are just dropping out of the game a week and a half after the launch of the game. So pretty much you could be the judge of how screwed the game is going to be in the coming months. So again, PvP should be a #1 priority right now, in my opinion. It should not be much later as it is right now. So that's actually going into the second part. Actually, that's going into the third part of the video. I already finished the second part. Let's go on to the third part of the video, and that is the fact that the game doesn't have a real PvP system as of this time. And this is, again, not including the fact that the PvP system is only coming in 6 months' time. So that is a pretty massive issue if you ask me. From what I can see, because of the PvP system missing in action for until like 6 months from now, we're gonna have the same exact effect that happened with Need for Speed Payback, where players expected to see features that the game would have, but they didn't really get implemented until much later, like the online free roam. And they still have yet to do a bunch of other stuff, but let's ignore that as well. But the developers did, yes, the developers did say beforehand that the game doesn't have a PvP system and that it's coming, but that still will massively hurt the game. First impressions are really everything with the game. And the fact that players, the first impression that players got was the fact that PvP is not coming for another 6 months. Yeah, that's a pretty big hit on the game. Like, half of the, a large majority of the players are probably have not even bothered launching up the game from hearing that PvP just doesn't even exist. And so, as you probably know, PvP is a pretty major reason why people play games. They want to battle it out with real players and not really a bunch of slow and somewhat stupid AI/bots. And like I said in the previous video, if the crew had a PvP system right off the bat, it would make farming so much more bearable and so much more fun. But as of right now, there's absolutely nothing for most players to do in the game besides farm for 6 hours straight on the same mission over and over again, which is why I feel most players are just dropping out of the game so quickly and kind of, yeah, not really having fun with the game. At least with PvP, players would actually get a lot more variety with the same amount of playtime. So that's why I feel developers should make PvP a #1 priority right now. Excuse me. Because the longer they take to implement PvP into the game, the more players will start dropping out of the game, and as a result, permanently move on to another game. So that's going to be a pretty big hit for the developers, if you ask me. So that's pretty much it for the third problem. Let's go on to the fourth problem. There will be 5 of them, so we're getting fairly close to the end of the video. The fourth problem I found is that there's not really that many super long missions like in the first game. Personally, I really enjoyed playing the 1 and 2 hour long faction missions from the first game, and I would like to see a sort of family faction system get implemented into the second game. I think it would be appropriate to make the 1 and 2 hour long races as like bonus missions, so that they don't really count towards the overall progression of the families. And they should also make it so that there's no leaderboards on the bonus missions that are like 1 to 2 hour long races. So they're kind of like fun missions you can play if you want longer missions to play and just to kind of have fun with. But yeah, just basically make the missions so that they're cruising missions, so you can do by yourself or with 2 or 4 players in a crew. So of course that would add a lot of replay value to the game. So and of course the longest mission, as most of you might know, is the New York Hypercar mission, which is around 35 minutes long. But in my opinion, like I said, there should be longer races, since that 35-minute long race is kind of not very interesting, and it doesn't really show you much of the environment. And so yeah, and I would really like to do a mission that would take you around the entire map, like the faction mission from the first game that was called Round Trip, I believe it was. but I would prefer not to see missions that are more than 2.5 hours long, because after a while a 4-hour long faction mission will become pretty annoying and a bit boring. But yeah, missions no longer than 2.5 hours are welcome in my book. And they would allow you to admire more of the scenery that Ivory Tower works so hard to make look good in this game. Now onto the fifth and final problem. The fifth gameplay problem is that the game doesn't really motivate players to play it every single day. If you played the first game, you probably remember that there were daily login rewards, and also daily challenges that would give you bucks. The Crew 2 doesn't have anything like that as of right now, but it appears we will get daily club challenges through Uplay in the future. So that's good, I guess. Hopefully this time around they will reward you with performance parts instead of bucks, since bucks are fairly easy to get with just a few hours of farming. But back to the daily login reward. If you played the first game, you probably also remember that the faction war system existed, and that when you'd log in, you'd get a bucks reward. And the higher your reward would be higher depending on how high up you were in the faction's rank. But essentially, it would be cool implementing a system where, with the families, where you'd choose a particular family to represent, and from playing missions, you would gain XP towards the family. But I will only touch a little bit on this kind of idea because, yeah, that would take too long for me to explain. And I might do a separate video on this whole entire family factions mission type system. I'm pretty sure they already have an idea of like implementing something like this, but I feel maybe a video would be pretty interesting to do, just so they could have some inspiration to go by. And so that's pretty much it for this video. Those are the main problem spots I found with the game, but here's a few honorable mentions with gameplay problems that I will briefly touch on. So essentially, the first one is that I would like to see more live extreme missions be added in, since 5 of them are not enough in my opinion, and I would also like to see the first episode of the live extreme series be added into the map, so players can replay it if they want to with their own vehicles. Second, there are a ton of vehicles to choose from, but there isn't really a reason to buy every single one of them unless you are a die-hard collector and you just kind of want to 100% the game. I would like to see bonus missions be added in that restrict you to one particular brand or limit you to vehicles from one country. Of course, the missions would be based on one brand and one discipline, or one country and one discipline. And so yeah, that's it with the honorable mentions, and yeah, that's pretty much the end of the video. Yes, I know that the main problems I talked about are not completely important, but from what I could see, the lack of PvP is the most important thing that the developers should focus on right now. It should be dealt with to ensure the game will stay alive for more than 2 years. I know that the Crew franchise has been very good with long-time support, but this is only the second game. The second game could easily make or completely break the entire franchise. Will destroy the franchise, I mean. Which means it could easily end up like the Test Drive Unlimited franchise, and I would prefer for this game to not end up like Test Drive Unlimited 2 did. But so far, it's not really looking like the Crew 2 will suffer from the same problem as TDU2, at least for the time being. The second game does make a really good first impression on players, but the endgame aspect is what really kills the game, and if they don't do something about it, then yeah, it won't end very well for the game. So with all of that out of the way, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like. If you agreed with most, if not all parts of the video, share the video around to get Ivory Tower's attention so that they know what aspects they need to focus on with the game as soon as possible, and hopefully this will also motivate them to actually work harder to get PvP out as soon as possible and not 6 months from now. But if you didn't agree with all parts of the video, don't leave any rating in the video, just instead comment what you feel needs the most amount of attention right now. So that's it, catch you later.